चलिए सीधे प्रेस वार्ता में।
Bali, Indonesia from tomorrow for the G20 summit. To give us more details about this forthcoming visit, we have the privilege of having Foreign Secretary Sir Shri Vinay Quatra here with us. Sir, I would request you to make an opening remarks and then we can take perhaps a few questions.
Thank you, Arindam. Good afternoon to all of you, and thank you very much for coming out on Sunday for this special briefing on Prime Minister's upcoming visit to Bali that starts tomorrow. Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi will be attending the 17th G20 summit meeting being hosted in Indonesia by Indonesia on 15-16th November in Bali. The summit is likely to be attended, as is the tradition, by the leaders of G20 member countries, guest countries and international organizations. As you all know, G20 is the premier forum for international economic cooperation, and it plays a crucial role in shaping and strengthening the global architecture and governance on all major international economic and developmental issues. The G20 members represent around 85% of the global GDP, over 75% of the global trade, and about 2/3 of the world's population. This G20 summit is particularly special because, as you are aware, India will hold the presidency of the G20 summit from 1st of December 2022 for a one-year period, and the presidency handover will take place during the summit in Bali. During the summit, Prime Minister Modi and other G20 leaders will deliberate extensively upon key issues of contemporary relevance, including the state of global economy, issues relating to energy, environment, agriculture, health and digital transformation, etc. As per the current program, the Bali summit comprises of 3 working sessions at the leaders level, where PM will be participating. These include the sessions on food and energy security, a session on digital transformation, and a session on health. G20 deliberations have acquired a greater salience in the current global economic and political context. Coming on the top of the existing environmental challenges, lack of progress in the SDGs and the pandemic, the world is currently struggling with many important challenges. These includes uneven post-pandemic economic recovery, debt vulnerabilities, especially in the countries of the global south, ongoing conflict in Europe, and its knock-on effect such as food security challenges, energy crisis and inflation on all countries of the world. G20 leaders will discuss these challenges and underscore the importance of closer multilateral cooperation to help overcome these challenges. As the incoming presidency, India has always actively engaged in the past and during this presidency of Indonesia also with all the G20 countries and participants throughout this year. Our position has been of steadfast and strong support to Indonesia, which as the presidency has shown strong leadership in ensuring that the G20 platform discusses issues of substantive interest to the world. The Prime Minister, as I mentioned earlier, Prime Minister would receive the G20 presidency from His Excellency Widodo, the President of Indonesia, at the closing session of the Bali summit. And as you all know, India will host the next G20 summit in September 2023, the dates of which have already been announced. Prime Minister Modi will also utilize the opportunity of his presence at the Bali summit to invite the G20 leaders to India's G20 summit. The G20 summit program also includes a leader's visit to what is called in Bahasa Indonesia Taman Hutan Raya, it's a mangrove forest in Bali on 16th of November. As you know, mangroves are an important refuge of coastal biodiversity and act as bioshields against extreme climatic events and as important carbon sinks. India's own mangrove cover is significant, with one of the highest biodiversity in the world. We also recently had agreed to join the Global Mangrove Alliance, which was launched jointly by Indonesia and UAE. On the sidelines of the Bali summit, Prime Minister would have several bilateral interactions with the G20 leaders to brief them, of course, on India's evolving G20 priorities, as also to review key elements of bilateral engagement with these world leaders. India's G20 presidency hopes to provide new strength, direction, and perspective to G20 discussions on diverse subjects, which include green development, lifestyle for environment, digital transformation, inclusive and resilient growth, women-led development, and more importantly, greater voice for the global South in issues of international economic cooperation, as also on the need for reformed 21st century institutions. During our G20 presidency, India, Indonesia, and Brazil would be the Troika. This would be the first time in G20 that the Troika would consist of 3 developing countries and emerging economies in a row. India, as the next chair, would endeavor to provide a greater voice to issues of interest to the global South, as I said earlier, and steer the G20 agenda in a representative and balanced manner. During his visit to Bali, Prime Minister will also address and interact with the Indian community and Friends of India in Bali at the Indian community reception on the 15th of November. Indian and community and diaspora have a strong presence across Indonesia. Prime Minister would depart Bali on 16th November 2022 on the conclusion of the Bali summit for India. I will stop here and be happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. We'll take a few questions. Okay, we start with you first.
Foreign Secretary, what are the bilaterals?
Please introduce yourself for record.
From NDTV. What are the bilaterals that have already been decided for the Prime Minister?
Person?
Just adding to that specifically, is there going to be a meeting, because this is one occasion where the President of China, Xi Jinping, will be there. Will there be any meeting with Mr. Xi and Prime Minister Modi? Also, given that the Saudi Crown Prince and Prime Minister Mohammed bin Salman had to put off his visit at the last minute, will the Prime Minister be meeting him over there? And any details you can tell us about the bilateral agendas?
There was somebody else, yeah, Akhilesh.
So I am Akhilesh Suman from Sansad TV. Actually, this G20 summit is taking place, after pandemic and when economic recovery is taking place amidst the Russia-Ukraine war. So, what is the message that Prime Minister Narendra Modi from Indian side will be giving so that the world can face the challenges and resolve it?
Sorry, could you repeat the last part? Message to?
What will be the message from Prime Minister Narendra Modi for G20 leaders to implement how world can face the challenges and resolve it?
Okay. Sudeep? Okay.
Sir, Shudhiranjan from Bloomberg, sir. You talked about debt vulnerability of the global South. Could you give us any more details as to what the Prime Minister, what kind of a message or what kind of a response that the Prime Minister would want from G20 on this particular issue?
Thank you. For the question and any other queries that might be there with regard to the bilateral engagements that the Prime Minister would have on the sidelines of the Bali summit. Yes, as I said, Prime Minister will have meeting with bilateral meetings with several leaders of the G20 on the sidelines of the Bali summit. These meetings, these bilateral engagements with the other leaders are still in the process of being scheduled. This is something which remains under evolution, and as the program unfolds after Prime Minister Modi lands in Bali, we would keep you apprised of each and every bilateral interaction that Prime Minister has in Bali on the sidelines. Akhilesh, with regard to your question on, and I think in a way part of it is, one specific part of it raised by Mr. Sudhir Ranjan on the Voice of Global South. The challenges that the world, the economic challenges, which is the economic and development challenges, which is the principal focus of the G20 meetings. As you know, that under this rubric, the developing countries of the world and the world at large is facing several challenges, and I listed some of those key challenges in my opening remarks. These includes the continuing uncertainty and challenges relating to energy security. The whole rubric of environment and climate challenges and how the world should come together to respond to them forms a second key basket of issues in which there has been a strong challenge to the entire global community. The challenges relating to the food security. The pandemic has clearly showed us the problem of the global health security that all of us encounter. On the other hand, there are issues which are more along the lines of objectives which are full of opportunities. For example, the digital space, the digital world, the delivery of governance using digital platforms, using digital instruments, which, as you know, is a unique and one of very strong competencies of the Indian economic ecosystem. So obviously, when you address these challenges and when you respond to these opportunities, it has to be done in a manner which provides, important voice to the developing world, to the countries of the South. And that's what I mentioned, that in addressing these challenges and in offering these opportunities, idea is that the benefit of mitigation of these challenges and harnessing of these opportunities should go in a very, very large measure to the developing South also. And that, I think, is the underlying intent of what I mentioned. And these challenges and these opportunities are the very much the ones which would in which the discussions would take place, and I am not, of course, at this stage. I can't tell you for sure what the Prime Minister's interventions would be, but I'm assuming that it would be an intersection set of many of these elements and specific subsections of these elements.
Start with you, please, microphone.
So, Shailesh from National Defense. So, as you said,
from which
National Defense. Shailesh from National Defense.
So, as you said that PM would be inviting G20 leaders to India. Will you please confirm if we decided what would be the venue of the G20 summit in India? And
We have already issued a press release, I think now a couple of months ago, where we said that on the G20 presidency will be on the 9th and 10th of September next year in New Delhi.
Okay. Right, thank you, sir, for that. And second thing, yesterday Army Chief said that the situation on LAC is stable and unpredictable. Since PM would be going to G20 summit where Chinese president would also be there, do we see any similar kind of enthusiasm from Chinese side in having bilateral with PM, so the situation can be resolved by peacefully, mutually through dialogue?
I am hesitant to allow this question, let me be very honest, simply because this assumes a meeting and then goes on to the discussions of that meeting. I'll let Sir answer the way he wants it, but I would say that, look, I think you should wait for if the such bilaterals happen, and if so, what we will share with you at that point. I think larger issue, this is, let's focus on the Prime Minister's visit here. You had raised your hand. I'll come back to you.
Hello, sir. I'm Urvashi Khona from the New Indian. My question is this, that will India raise cross-border terrorism, Pakistan's cross-border terrorism at G21? And second, 87% of Indonesians are Muslims. There is Pasmanda Samaj in UP that is backing PM. So is this a kind of new trust for the Muslims' welfare after triple talaq or so?
Sorry, could you repeat the last question? I'm completely lost you on that one.
Okay, so 87% of the Indonesians are Muslims,
Yes.
and in UP we see Pasmanda Samaj backing PM.
Okay.
Is there a new trust somewhere to see that this is for the welfare of the Muslims? That is
The G20 visit? You
Sorry?
mean G20 visit, or in what context is the question?
Because PM is in India.
Okay, I mean, by that argument, it would extend to every country which has a large Muslim population, but anyway, somebody else had a hand, yeah.
सर मैं मधुरेंद्र न्यूज़ नेशन से आपने अभी जिक्र किया कि प्रधानमंत्री वहाँ पर इंडियन डायस्पोरा को भी संबोधित करेंगे क्या फॉर्मेट होगा बेसिकली और दरअसल इंडोनेशिया में भारत के कई सांस्कृतिक प्रेजेंस को हम देखते हैं तो क्या उन स्थानों का भी प्रधानमंत्री विजिट करेंगे या कोई कार्यक्रम ऐसा है
Yeah.
Sir, I'm Meghna Dev from DD News. So India has recently joined the Mangrove Alliance for Climate at COP27, and as you said, that PM will be visiting a mangrove forest there during his visit. Anything more if we are aiming at tech transfers or anything and bringing all the G20 countries and member countries together to increase mangrove cover or anything on that front, if you can give us more details?
So for a moment.
To Shailesh's question, which Arindam has already, and I have also touched upon it in the very first question that I responded to, that meetings, bilateral meetings with the other leaders of the G20 is something which remains, under evolution, which remains under the part of the program finalization, and as and when those meetings finalized, what gets discussed in those meetings, etc., we would of course be, briefing you on them when we are in Bali, and I would hope to see some of you perhaps in Bali at that time. Subhashi, to your question, I don't really see a specific correlation to the agenda of the G20 for which the Prime Minister is going to participate, and a direct connect with what you asked. Fairly valid points in terms of your own context. I would simply say that the Bali summit is principally structured along 3 sessions. There is a session on food and energy security. There is a session relating to health. And there is a third session relating to digital transformation. The interventions by the leaders at each of these sessions would limit themselves to these aspects. Of course, there is a global economic and political context in which the G20 summit is taking place. We at this stage don't know what references to this context will be there in the communique, etc. But the leaders themselves per se would essentially be participating in these 3 sessions. Then जो आपका प्रश्न था भारतीय समुदाय से जो प्रधानमंत्री जी का जो इंटरैक्शन होगा, ये स्टैंडर्ड जो भारतीय समुदाय से जहाँ भी जब भी प्रधानमंत्री की यात्रा होती है तो उसमें जो भारतीय समुदाय, जैसे कि मैंने कहा जैसे कि आपने भी कहा इंडोनेशिया में जो सांस्कृतिक रूप से दो समाजों के बीच में जो संबंध रहे हैं वो काफ़ी प्राचीनतम संबंध रहे हैं और भारतीय समुदाय काफ़ी एक सशक्त उपस्थिति इंडोनेशिया में है। तो बाली यात्रा के दौरान प्रधानमंत्री जी भारतीय समुदाय से भी इंटरैक्ट करेंगे। I think I couldn't get I couldn't get the connect in Meghna in your question between the mangrove forest and the digital tech part which you mentioned. Yeah, so yeah, this is the entire ecosystem of issues that relate to environment conservation, sustainable lifestyles, and of course climate conservation, preservation. Mangrove, as you know, are, as I said, very crucial to the biodiversity rubric of a country, and we ourselves hold a very strong mangrove forest cover. The event in Bali is essentially a brief event during one of the days in which the President of Indonesia will, we don't know whether all the leaders will go, but that's the expectation. All the leaders will go and participate in this small event, which essentially showcases Indonesia's own efforts relating to the mangrove forest cover. What we do in India on the expansion of mangrove forest cover, what we propagate globally for this is obviously a line of effort which remains very, very continuous and very, very strong at this stage.
Are there any other queries? Okay, last round. Sorry, microphone, I can't hear. No, you had another question? Which day is the mangrove forest visit? I think it's on day 2 morning, but let them work out the program. Yes, please.
A quick one on digital transformation, sir.
Sorry, ma'am, didn't catch your name.
Sir, Sandhya with ET. A quick one on the digital transformation. What is PM's message going to be on this, and are we going to highlight any particular issues with respect to digital transformation as the world faces the challenges on currency bit?
On currency bit?
Yeah.
Currency?
Are you referring to crypto?
Cryptos.
That's a long stretch, sir. Anybody else before I close? Okay, if not, sir, that'll be the last question.
As I said earlier on, also in response to one of the questions, the space of delivery of governance through digital, through use of digital public platforms, through digital goods, through digital products, through digital services, is a space which is full of multiple opportunities across the entire range of economic activity. You touched upon only one aspect of it, which is the crypto. And I think if you look at the governance space, whether it is delivery of governance in the health space, and pandemic showed us very, very clearly, or across any other range of economic activity, the use of digital technology to be able to deliver that governance more efficiently, administratively more efficiently, more transparently, is something which over the last 6 to 7 years has assumed a global recognition in terms of what India's achievements have been, what India has been able to do in this field. As I said earlier, it would not be correct for me to prejudge in any way as to what the Honorable Prime Minister's interventions would be. But there is a full ecosystem of what country has done under Prime Minister's leadership. I'm sure a lot of this will find a mention and will find mention and find mention by other countries also. during the Bali summit.
Thank you, sir. You have something else? Microphone.
Of what country has done under Prime Minister's leadership, I'm sure a lot of this will find a mention and will find mention and find mention by other countries also during the Bali summit.
Thank you, sir. You have something else? Microphone.
So just I wanted to know, Achilles Suman from Sansar TV, who will be the part of a delegation with Prime Minister, and will there be a G20 declaration?
Yes, sir. Sir. Look, of course, the delegation always, till it's finalized, when it leaves, I'm hesitant to comment. But on the other hand, the Sherpa is already in Bali. The Sherpa meetings are going on. We'll have external affairs ministers there. We will have, delegation members. I think NSA is also part of the delegation. But till it happens, look, these things change between today and tomorrow when it takes off. I don't want to commit to a delegation composition. As regards the other elements, sir, he was asking. Sorry.
Second part kya tha?
Yeah, the outcome, sir.
Yeah, so
that's always the hope, sir.
The communique of the G20 Bali summit is still under negotiation. I think our team led by Sherpa, our Su Sherpa and the other senior officials are currently in Bali. The communique is in fairly advanced stages of negotiation, but it's not final at this stage. So till it is final, its elements are obviously not made public, but yeah, that is something which is under negotiations.
People are having more questions now. We have one tight.
Since you were discussing the communique, I just wanted to ask you if the real, from what we understand, the real differences are over 2 paragraphs on the subject of the war in Ukraine. Is India per se, is India agreeable to a special mention of the war in Ukraine? Or is it going to be about just the after effects of the food security and energy security issues?
Yeah, I'll just mention a couple of things for your consideration. One, the G20 communique is by consensus. It is not a document that is voted upon. So whatever communique is there, it would be a consensus document. Two, communique is the culmination of a year-long set of meetings of the G20 presidency of any country, which includes several ministerials. For example, if I recall correctly, even within just last 6 to 7 months since post-pandemic, the physical meetings have become more frequent. India itself has participated in 12 ministerials at the level of ministers. Now, outcome of those ministerial documents, whether it's an agreed communique or it's a chair statement, does find reflection and specific mention in the G20 final communique also. And that communique remains under discussion. Obviously, all the outcomes of the other ministerial will feed into it. The political context of what's happening in the world is a part of it, whether you call off the conflict itself or the knock-on effect. As I said, in what way it emerges finally in the communique, I think is remains to be seen, because it is still under discussions and negotiations in Bali.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you for the detailed presentation. Thank you for all joining us, and we will continue to update you as the visit unfolds. Thank you.
तो विदेश सचिव विनय क्वात्रा को आप सुन रहे थे। प्रधानमंत्री नरेंद्र मोदी G20 शिखर सम्मेलन में भाग लेने के लिए बाली जाने वाले हैं 14 तारीख।